Hi everyone, and welcome back to another tutorial. Today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to install the Windows Server 2022 on a nested KVM environment on Ubuntu 20.04, and we'll use the standard NAT capability to allow the Windows Server 2022 to do its regular update. Now, before we start going into the virtualization stack, I'm going to install the X window or the GDE using XFCE first, right? So the command is, now before we do that, let's connect to my Contabo. No, sorry, this is on DigitalOcean. Um, I'm using SSH key-based authentication. Okay, once we're in, let's issue the command app install. Okay, I'm doing all this using root, so we don't have to put sudo in front if you're not using root but a sudo account. Then you have to use sudo in front of all the commands, right? I believe you should know that, right? So XFCE4 is the X window that we're going to install. Then we're going to install the goodies that follows with. Okay, let's do yes. Okay, once that's done, we're going to install the type VNC server. Okay, and then let me just make sure that I have cleaned up my VNC server config. Okay, I still do have them. Let me just delete off the Okay, the reason why I'm doing that is because okay, I still need to delete off the password and the startup file. Okay, so I've as you can see, I've installed this previously, so it has created the files there. Right, not to worry. So usually after you install type VNC, you need to launch VNC server for the first time. Right, it'll prompt you for a password. Key in a password for it, and do take note that VNC only support a length of 8 character, which is not very secure for exposing it to public internet. So do take note of that. I'll show you how to use the SSH local port forwarding to access VNC over the SSH tunnel, which in my view is a little bit more secure. Okay, let's once that is done, we need to also edit the X startup. So VNC does not create a VNC server. Type VNC server does not create a type VNC server dot service, so you can't do the regular system control start, stop, restart of the VNC service, right? But we will use the VNC server command to queue and restart the service. I'll show you in a bit. So after the password, we need to edit this file. So you need to do this for all users, unfortunately. Of course, you can create a script that makes it a little bit easier. But for this tutorial, we're going to show you the manual way of doing individually. So for root account, similarly, for VNC, so type server X Windows, right? They usually use the normal genome Windows, so they have set up a workaround for addressing the solid gray screen issue, right? So, but for XFCE X window, which is a lightweight GDE in my view, right? So you need to add in the xstart XFCE XFCE4 on the background with the ampersand sign, right? So you need to do that for all your VNC client. Okay, or the VNC user. Okay, so once that's done, we want to stop the service that we have done earlier. This is the way to restart the service. You have to queue the session, right? And then relaunch the session, right? So for those of you who are looking at changing the port, you can do it with the colon sign followed by the number. So default VNC server uses the 5901 or the 5900 ports, right? And when you specify the numbers behind the colon over here, it signifies the addition of the port number to 5900. So if I do 55, session 55, I will launch a session using port 5955. Okay, so I'll show you. So right, it's already running. So let's do a SS, which is sort of a NAT stack replacement. You can see that 5955 is already running. So I want to restart that service. So I'm going to queue that. Okay, five nine five five. Okay, now if you can't use the queue command, you can always queue it with the process ID, right? Issue the command queue -9 15192. Okay, let's check out the temp folder. Okay, we need to remove the x59 log file because if not, it will tell us the error. Okay, never mind. Let's try and launch this again. Okay, it will tell me that the temp file is locked, so let's remove that. Okay, the reason why it's happening is because I believe I might have run the VNC server on another user, so it's locked. So it's pretty okay. Just delete the file that is locked as you go along. Okay, now that we're done, we should be good to launch VNC server on port 55. Okay, so that's what you need to do to install the GDE and allow remote graphical user interface management using type VNC. Okay, now that we are done with the VNC and GDE installation, we're going to actually go down and install the virtualization software stack. So we're going to install firstly the bridge utility, right? It's needed for a lot of the bridge function that we're going to do in future video. Do a CPU checker. Now if you are using and hosting your Linux KVM in the hosted environment, unless you are buying a dedicated bare metal machine, it's usually already running on KVM, right? So this tutorial is really running nested KVM on top of KVM, right? So we need to have some of these checks in place. Okay, next we're going to install the virtual library client and then the virtual library daemon as well as QEMU, which is the software that allows us to run virtualization on the actual physical KVM, QEMU-KVM as well. Last but not least is the virtual manager. This is optional. The virtual manager is optional for those of you who are used to using VMware Workstation, Fusion, Oracle Box, Hyper-V, kind of GUI based guest VM creation. Virtual manager is sort of the equivalent for you to do that. And in this tutorial, we will be using that. If you have saw my previous tutorial on Linux, installing a Ubuntu guest VM on top of Ubuntu, you have gone through some of the command line based virtualization or guest VM setup using command line, right? But I'll show you the virtual manager using the GUI setup for this tutorial. Okay, let's install that. Okay, once it's done, do a sudo kvm OK check. For Ubuntu, you can issue this command. For other distro, you can use the egrep command. right? Bare minimum, you need to make sure that the device, KVM device exists and you can use KVM acceleration, right? It doesn't mean that it will work even if you have the KVM okay, check, and then you saw that the KVM exists and acceleration is possible, right? It still depends on memory, hardware, the hosted environment. So there are other factors that goes into uh, determining whether you are able to run KVM or nested KVM, right? So I've tested on DigitalOcean so far, depends on the location, the machines, the time of the day, the performance varies, right? But bare minimally, if you are using the dedicated uh, VDS or virtual dedicated server, generally it will work, right, with sufficient memory and RAM, right? Oracle Cloud does work depending on the instance you choose as well. The rest of the provider, some work, some doesn't. So there's a whole list of provider that does work. So far, DigitalOcean, Contabo in terms of their VDS and Oracle Cloud seems to be working, and depend on the machine that you are using, the performance varies. Okay, so I'm doing this on DigitalOcean. So far, surprisingly, the India server which I'm on is working well. I guess that's the load there has not been fully consumed yet. Okay, so once that's done, since we're on root, we don't have to add users and do the rest of the things. But what you want to do is to also do a quick check of the virtualization daemon to make sure that it is active and running. So it is definitely active and running. I did create a bridge for this, but we'll not be using that. There's some tweaking I need to do over here, but it will be for my next tutorial. Okay, so we're good. It's active and running, as you can see. Now the next thing we want to do is to exit this session. Okay, I'm going to use the local port forwarding, right? -L to port forward 5955. Okay, you can specify the source IP, right, which is the target on this machine, to the targeted machine that we are going to SSH to, right, which is the Ubuntu. So we are actually, mapping the port of forwarding the port locally from 5955 to the Ubuntu server on the other end on 5955, so that we can access VNC through the SSH tunnel. Okay, now that we are connected, let's clear the screen. Okay, for those of you who are using Mac, by default, Mac has the ability to launch VNC Client, right? If you're not aware, now you know, right? So because it allows for VNC read-only management of the Mac machine. So by default, you can already use the VNC client. You can launch it using the VNC client or native client, or you can just open up a browser like me and then key in the VNC command, and then we should be accessing, right? So you need to key in the password that we have set. Okay, and then you can see that we will see the VNC session. Now, you might need to restart the VNC server. As you can see, if not, you get the gray screen of death, right, which is very common. So if you hit into this problem, no worries, just close the session. Okay, we're gonna do a very simple -q the current session, and then launch a new session. Okay, this is the fastest way. Okay, 5955 is running. Let's hit back to the VNC 5955. Oops. 27.0.0.1 localhost. Same thing. Okay, still giving me gray screen. Let's queue this first. Might have set the command wrongly. Okay, we've queued the process. Not too sure what's happening, but let's just check the. Did I key in the x startup command wrongly? So it's oops, my apologies. It's actually start x FCE4, right? So little error like this does cause some problem. Okay, let's start this again. Oops, my apologies. I'm supposed to be using 55 instead. Let's remove. So when you use the manual queue command, you need to remove all the log resources in the temp, right? Let's run the server again. We should be good now. Okay, and you can see that we have overcome the gray screen of death, right? So once we're in, just click on the terminal and then you can launch the virtual manager from the terminal on the GDE. Okay, so we're in. Couple of other things that we need before the installation. So I've already downloaded the Windows Server 2022 ISO, which is you can do it if you have MSDN account. You can use it and download from your MSDN account for lab and development testing. If not, you can always sign up for the evaluation license online, right? And then the other one that is needed for some distro is the virtual IO for Windows driver from Fedora. So you need to have both of this downloaded into your KVM before you start. You can always do network install, but I find that downloading it into the server actually helps to speed up the installation process. Okay, now that we are in there, okay, then what you can do is right click on this QEMU new KVM. Okay, right click on new, select local install. For my case, like I mentioned, you can do network boot, import from existing this image, QCal image. You can do the direct download from the internet as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is to browse and look for downloads. Right, if you don't see all this folder pre-map, you can always browse local and then go to root download and then select the image. Right, description you can keep it as 2016, but I like 19 better. Okay, and then for the memory, for during installation, I would prefer we have at least 4096. CPU minimally 2. I'm going to stretch it to 3 for this tutorial. And then select the custom storage, right? So I have attached storage already set up. Actually, no, I believe this is my attached storage. Uh, yes, this is my external storage with 99 100 gig availability. Okay, so you can always mount additional storage, right, using this create storage pool here. So select on the location you want to store your guest VM image and then click on add volume. You'll create a QCal2 format. Maximum capacity, you can start with 20. For this tutorial, I'm going to do 40, which is usually the recommended for a Windows server. Okay, let's click on finish. It will create the image. You can always do your fix this and expansion after installation as well, but we'll not touch that today. Choose the volume, select forward. Okay, this is the name that will show up in your VRISH command in the command line. So we're going to give it a very good recognizable name called Win2K22. Okay, next what you need to do is to click on customize configuration. We need to do a few tweaks, and then for network selection we're going to use the default NAT virtual network. Okay, once that's done, click on finish. You'll come to the customization screen. A few tweaks. First, boot option, select the CD-ROM, right? Boot from the CD-ROM. And then on the next side of things, okay, you need to always apply. Good thing is your prompt you can click on yes. We're going to use the standard device model E1000E for Ubuntu. In some of the KVMs or the other distribution, you might need to select virtual IO, right? So E1000E works for me for Ubuntu, so I'm going to use that. Display server, I've gotten into a few issue with Spy server where the keyboard get disconnected. So VNC so far has been serving me well. So I'm going to use that. Apply. The last is to add the storage device, right? Add a new CD-ROM drive. Select the Virtual IO Windows driver ISO, right? So select that. In this tutorial, we will not really need it, but for other Linux distribution or for the previous version of Ubuntu, especially if you have not updated the system, you might need this, right? I'll recommend mounting it first, whether you need it or not, because if not, it'd be quite painful to restart this process, especially installing Windows Server online or in the cloud. So once that's done, click on finish, apply the changes, and then click on begin installation. For those of you who are expecting, the same speed that you get for installing Windows Server on your EXSI or your VM workstation at home, right? You might be disappointed because VDS generally are shared resources, right? Even though it might be so-called virtually dedicated servers, sometimes performance, bandwidth, and stuff might impact the speed of the installation. So it does take some time to try and install Windows Server on the nested KVM in the cloud. Okay, so far this server has been one of the fastest I have so far, but it still takes some time, as you can see. The great thing about video is that we will fast forward, where it takes a little bit more time. Okay, while we're running, let's just run the top command to see the memory utilization. Oops. You can see the actual CPU, the virtual library CPU that is used, as well as the virtual memory. So we just try and monitor them. Okay, so the rest of the installation is pretty similar, right? Install now. As you can see, this is not too bad in terms of the speed. So you can see on the when you're installing nested KVM, the CPU usually for the virtualization daemon library usually spikes quite a fair bit. Okay, always important to have a valid license. I know that for lab and testing, we usually try and test until we are satisfied before we enter the license. But do make sure that you have the necessary license. Great thing about software today, like Microsoft gives you a 90 days to 180 days evaluation image that you can use to install and then enter the license when you are ready to convert it to a permanent lab machine, for example. So I'm not going to key the license here. I will do that once I decide to finalize the hosting environment. So I don't have a product key. Okay, we will need to install the desktop experience for now. For those of you who are very familiar with PowerShell, you can do the standard without desktop experience. For me, still not an expert in PowerShell, so I prefer my desktop experience, especially when I'm setting up my AD MPSs, CA certificate authority, right? So I'm going to choose desktop experience. It comes with disadvantages when you install desktop, the GDE or graphical desktop environment. It does consume more memory and CPU resources. Okay, click next. Read the license agreement, right? What generally it does is don't do bad things. Make sure you have valid license. For my lab, it's my personal license, so I'm the one agreeing, allowing myself to use the license, so I'm going to agree to that. For new installation, choose custom, right? So this is the part whereby the virtual IO window driver comes in play, right? So in some of the distro, right, you don't see this hard disk being detected, right? Because it's a virtual hard disk, a virtual partition that you're going to create. So you will need to go to load driver. Okay, click on browse. Now if you have added the CD-ROM drive, right, which is the virtual IO Win ISO, you will then be able to go in here and select like AMD 64, and then select Win2 K22. Okay, so I believe mine might be a i386. No, it's definitely not i386, right? So AMD 64 is the usual one that we will use. Okay, then select the Windows version. The great thing is that it already have the 2K22 driver. Okay, select next. So if your machine doesn't have the initial driver, you actually see a driver pop up here, right? So this is the drivers that are not compatible with the hardware, so it's not showing up. That's why it's hidden. Usually you will see a similar driver here if you don't already have the ability to detect the window drivers. Now if this doesn't work for you, that means that you have to recompile your own network driver if you know how to. It's not too difficult, just a lot of trial and error. If not, Google is your best friend. Look for an alternative to the Fedora driver. Okay, now don't click on the close, right, because you will restart the installation. Click on back, right, and then select the unallocated space. Click on new. Click on apply. The usual window magic will happen. You will slice the partition into system and primary partition. For system recovery and base OS installation, takes a bit of time, right? You can see the CPU is spiking, and the memory is, very heavily utilized. Okay, once it's done, then select primary, click on next. Okay, the necessary installation will happen. Okay, from now on is standard implementation installation as usual, right? We'll let it complete. Usually it takes about a couple of hours on other VDS. I believe for this instance in Bangalore, India, so far it's been able to get done in less than an hour. So the magic of video editing will kick in. I will fast forward this section and then come back when the installation is done. So once we get past the most painful stage of installing the server, the rest is actually pretty okay. So for those of you who are, trying this out in your VDS, my recommendation, if they provide a trial, try out on the various location and the various server available, right? And then you might find one that has a decent performance, right? So as you can see, once we pass the installation phase, the actual loading of the Windows Server is not too bad. Now, there are many ways you can actually create a Windows image on KVM, serialize the installation so that you remove all the unique ID, the license key, and then you can actually copy the QCOW2 image to various KVM. So you don't have to go through the painful step of installing the Windows Server from scratch. And that's one of the best thing about virtualization technology, whether you are using KVM, Hyper-V, or EXXI, right? VMware capability. So you can see the great thing about using the NAT feature is that without doing any customization, you get access to the network and the default NAT, which is really meant for allowing the guest VM to go to the internet, but protecting the guest VM from whether it's a local network or external network potential exploit or attack, right? So of course, for usual use cases, this is good enough, but because I'm going to use AD for a variety of function for integration, I will need to configure the bridge so that I can expose the Windows Server to the rest of my local network across site-to-site VPN, right? Of course, I do have IP tables, and using the configuration, whether it's DNAT, redirect, or SNAT, right, to protect or try and minimize the risk for my AD server. So once that's done, what I like to do is to just do a quick check to make sure that I am able to connect to the internet through a browser. Okay, and I can use the opportunity to test out my favorite website. Okay, you can see, wow, right, my website loaded pretty fast, right? So for those of you who have been to my website, which is due for an upgrade, you can tell it actually takes a bit of time, right? So I do have my tutorial, various tutorial in terms of how to install a server 2022 on as a KVM, running a Ubuntu client on top of a Ubuntu client, toiling around with a couple of the Python stuff to simulate phishing attack for my demos and POVs. So stay tuned for those videos to come. Yeah, but as you can see, we are able to access. And the next thing we want to do, since I might keep this installation a little bit more permanent, I'm going to check for updates. Right. So the challenge with the minimum size that you see here with 8 gig RAM and 4 virtual CPU is that I can only run a AD with desktop installed for Windows Server 2022. The minute I try to run a second Windows Server 2022 with desktop, right, it actually will fail, right? One of the server will auto shut down. But I could create a couple of images and then at any one time just start on one. I'm toiling around with the PowerShell script so that I can actually install the Windows Server and AD without the GUI, right? So those require a little bit more time and effort to figure out, but it's worthwhile the effort. I'm going to install the Umbrella virtual appliance into the KVM so that I can have the end-to-end view of the Umbrella protecting my machine, right? I mean, it's not a common use case, but I would like to see that if my server tries to go out to the internet, what are the web pages that it might be accessing, because that also gives me an idea of potential exploit. On top of the firewall rules, I'm playing around with the layer 7 filtering capability for one of the open source products. So stay tuned for those, right? Because these are what builds up the labs and builds up the visibility from a security standpoint, right? So stay tuned for the next video, and thank you very much for watching, and stay safe and take care. Goodbye.